Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2, 3. All right, thank you very much. Welcome to Resource Stage. My name is Carl, and welcome to Horizon for those of you who came this evening, and welcome to those who are visiting online. I used to have this friend whose dad used to talk about the people in TV land, which I always thought was hilarious when I was a teenager. We don't really have TV land the same way anymore. We are going to be talking about lights tonight, and as I heard Bob talking to somebody earlier on this evening, and he was pointing out that we have been doing Resource Stage seminars for a very, very long time. In fact, actually in January, it'll be 20 years that we've been doing seminars of this style, and just trying to provide information to people like yourselves so that you can, know more about the technology that you're expected to use in your community theaters, in your schools, and in your churches, and wherever you might be using it. And so tonight is the first of our series of seminars for 2024-25. We've got seminars booked up into January now, or different types of events, and we're booking some interesting things right up into the spring, which we can talk about another time. But there's some cool stuff that's coming along. So thanks for joining us tonight, and we hope that you'll find it interesting to come again another time. So to get started, for the people who are here, how many of you are from community theaters? Great. How many of you from churches? Cool. Schools? All right. Anybody else? Did I miss anybody? In between? Where are you from? Brazil. Okay. Yes. Yeah. All right. There you go. Or Brazil. Anybody from a school or Brazil? There we go. One of the things that we're going to try to do tonight, if I'm good at it, is when we are asking questions back and forth to people, or if you've got questions in the room, we have a microphone that we throw around. Where did the catch box go? Do you have the catch box? Okay, Darren has catch box at the back, and we can throw that to you if you've got any questions. Then that way, the people on the live stream can hear you. So tonight we're talking about stage lighting, and we do sessions talking about stage lighting pretty much every year, and we talk about different things. Sometimes it's about fixtures, sometimes it's about control. We decided that tonight we're kind of doing a bit of a catch-all. We're going to talk a little bit about a lot of things that people ask questions about, and some of these things have come out of conversations that I might have had with some of you in the room. Like, I know that some of the things that we're talking about tonight, Peter and I have talked about over the last couple of months as their community theater has been purchasing some new equipment and been thinking through how these different pieces are going to work at the theater. And we have these kinds of conversations, we answer these kinds of questions, if not weekly, on a monthly basis. And then there are some things we're going to talk about tonight, which frankly, I think we should probably be talking about more. So I thought that it was a good idea that we touch on some of these. So let's get started. 10 things you should know about stage lighting. Number one, and any of you who have ever heard me have this kind of conversation in the past, you would probably have heard me talk about this, and that is, what is DMX? The people in the room, do you know what DMX is? No, yes, thumbs up, a kind of, maybe, sort of. All right, so DMX is, first of all, DMX is a short form. It's not exactly a true acronym, but it's for digital multiplex. It was a standard that was created by USITT, the United States Institute of Theater Technology, back in 1986, because what they were doing is they were looking for a way to standardize how lighting control worked for theatrical and concert lighting, moving away from analog wires. So analog wires would have had individual lines or a pair of lines going to each control piece, typically in a dimmer, to be able to turn things on and off. They were looking for a way of digitally controlling these things. It's a standard that you can find across all reputable theatrical and concert lighting manufacturers. You should be able to find anything out there should be able to control DMX if it is a theatrical fixture or a stage lighting fixture of some sort. DMX, or DMX 512, is made up of 512 channels of control being sent down one line. Okay? So 512 channels of information. And within that 512 channels, there is a value between 0 and 100%. So let's say we're talking about dimmers. So looking at old school dimmers, we have some old fixtures over here that are connected to a dimmer that's sitting on the floor right now. Those are old dimmers. Each one of those would, with a value of 0 to 100%, that will turn on and off to give you intensity of that light. Okay? 0 to 100%. So we have 512 channels. Okay? And each of those channels has a value of 0 to 100%. Good so far? All right. The truth is that's not true. Liar. That's right. There's 512 channels that have 256 steps. And if you are a computer-y type person, then you might say, oh, 256 steps. That sounds an awful lot like 8-bit. Because it is. So you have 256 steps, or between 0 and 255, 0 being one of those values, okay? Which means you have more than double the resolution that you would between 0 and 100%. Okay? And you say, that's great, Carl, but why do I care? Well, in the world of dimming, you probably don't care. But there are other reasons why you might care, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So does this make sense so far? So just some quick numbers to run through this. Click, there we go. So 0% is a DMX value of 0, 50% is 128, and 100% is 256. Okay? We could talk about DMX for a long, long time, and if any of you know Chris in our office, Chris could talk about DMX with you for days. But that's really most of what we're going to talk about tonight with DMX, but I do need to cover a couple of quick rules here. First of all, cable matters. We're going to talk about that later. It definitely matters. Even if you just remember that DMX cable matters, but we will talk about why later. Daisy chaining only. So we have these 4 fixtures right here. We are coming out of the console into the first fixture, to the next one, to the next one, to the next one. Okay? You can daisy chain DMX. You cannot use a Y cable. One of the important things to remember about DMX that a lot of people don't remember is that DMX is a digital protocol. It's not an analog protocol. So if you just go ahead and start building Y cables, it doesn't work. For some reason, because it's an XLR connector and we kind of think, well, that's kind of like a microphone cable, then we think we can do that. But nobody would ever dream of, I hope, to take their USB cable, cut it, and then solder the wires together and hope that that works. Because it wouldn't, right? And most people wouldn't even think about trying to do that. But for some reason, we think that, we can do that with DMX lines. It's not a good idea, okay? You can use a DMX splitter. A DMX splitter uses electronics. There's different kinds of DMX splitters. We are not going into that tonight, but there are different kinds. But with a DMX splitter, then you can split the DMX lines off into different areas, okay? You can have 32 fixtures per line. So if I'm coming out of the console, I can do 32 fixtures, linking them together. If I have a DMX splitter, again, a proper piece of electronics, not a Y cable, I can have 32 fixtures come off of each output of that, but I can't have 33. Will it work? There's a lot of things in this world that will work. Maybe, right? But it may not work perfect, and it's not a good idea. In fact, actually, usually what we tell people is stick in the area of about 30. Once you get to 30 fixtures, you should be thinking about probably doing something different, because also the type of cable, the quality of the cable, the distance, and so on and so forth can have an impact on that. Okay, remember, it's a digital protocol. It's only going to go so far before the ones and zeros aren't going to be working out the way you want them to. DMX over network. This is a whole other discussion, but you can run DMX over a network. But most of the fixtures that we're talking about this evening do not have network jacks on the back of them. They have XLR5 DMX jacks on the back. So if you are running DMX over a network, you need to convert it back to standard DMX at some point in time. You need to get that out of the network and into something that can plug into the fixtures. With that being said, we do have fixtures that do have Ethernet jacks on the back, but that's, and actually we're going to talk about one of those in just a minute. But most fixtures are going to be an XLR5 on the back or an XLR3 on the back, which we'll talk about as well. Okay? Are we good so far? This is making sense? All right. Number 2, fixture profiles. So I said that there are 512 channels of information coming down any DMX line. That is also often referred to as a DMX universe. 512 channels is one universe of DMX. We're good? But how do I tell a fixture like this one, for instance, how I'm going to control it? How do I tell the console how I should be controlling this light? So a simple LED fixture, usually, not always, but usually a simple LED fixture is 3 channels, red, green, and blue. I think probably everybody in the room has seen an LED fixture that's red, green, and blue at some point in time. It's not like 15 years ago when I said that and everybody looked at me like, you're crazy. A red, green, and blue fixture, we need to be able to have a DMX value for the red, the green, and the blue to be able to get different levels. Does that make sense? So this manufacturer, this is actually a Chauvet fixture, and this manufacturer has set up the light so that you can set it into a personality, into a profile or a mode that is red, green, blue. That's it. It's just RGB, red, green, blue. And, oh, actually, sorry, it's red, green, blue, white on this fixture. Okay? So, just really quick, let's see if we can do this really quickly. So, 5, and if I go over to this, so we can get red, right? Green, blue, white. 4 different channels. Okay? What's happening is that we have set a starting address for this fixture. And I'm not actually 100% sure what the starting address is on this light for tonight. It's 20. So what's happening is that the console, I'm telling the console, you're dealing with a light that has red, green, blue, white. And in its most basic personality, red is channel 1, green is red, green. Green is channel 2, 3 is blue, 4 is white. If the starting address for this fixture is 20, then red is 20, green is 21, blue, thank you, blue is 22, and white is going to be channel 23. Does that make sense? Okay? So in the fixture profile in the console, whether it's a computer or it's a big lighting console, whatever it is, the profile understands that it's going to take those DMX channels and split them up to here. So again, we're taking 4 of the DMX channels and we're giving different values. One value is for the red, one is for green, blue, and white. And we're giving it a value between 0 and 255 to create that output. Does that make sense? All right. Quick little bonus. If I have 2 fixtures and they're both set to the same DMX start address, if I had another one exactly the same as this, and it was sitting beside it, and they were both set with the same DMX address of 20, they're going to do exactly the same thing. If I set this one to be DMX starting address of 20 and the one beside it with DMX starting address of 21, when this one is 100% red, this one's going to be off. When this one is 100% blue, this one's going to be 100% red. Green. Thank you. Sorry, red, green. Right, green. But do you see what I'm saying? Okay, because the starting address, then it goes on for there. We could talk about this for a long time tonight, but we're going to keep moving. There are additional fixture profiles for many of the fixtures out there in the world, because manufacturers feel like, you know what, there are additional things you can do with our fixtures. So we're going to give you more and more channel options. This fixture can be expanded to another mode that's 6 channels that gives you a separate dimmer control where you can set a color and then you can set dimmer. It also gives you a separate channel for strobe if you're wanting to strobe that light in some sort of a way. Okay? It also has another profile that gives you additional information, or additional control of the light. This one has channel 1 is dimmer, channel 2 is red, green, blue, white. Then there is color macros, which do all kinds of things. Then there is color temperature, and then there's strobe, automatic programs, program speeds, sound sensitivity if your show needs that, and dimmer speed mode. So it gets up to 11 channels. So you can go from 4 channels to 11 channels, and you get to decide when you plug this light in and you patch it into your console which of those sorts of profiles you're going to be using. So that's important, because if you have one universe of control on your console, then you need to be thinking, how am I going to lay out my fixtures? Am I going to run it in 4-channel mode, in 6-channel mode, or in this 11-channel mode? Do I care about those macro things? Do I ever plan on using that sound-activated mode? And if you don't care about sound-activated mode, then you just skip it. Let's just go with the 6-channel mode, and let's just use that. Does that make sense? So the profile, the fixture profile, is telling the console how the DMX channels are going to lay out for that individual fixture. Some fixtures only have one profile, but many fixtures have many different options. So this is a great example. This is a kind of a cool light. This is built by Martin. It's called the Pixel LX, I think. This is kind of cool. It does all kinds of really neat things. I'll just let you watch that video for a second so you can see what it's doing. It's got all kinds of crazy eye candy and stuff. If you're running this fixture in compact mode, its simplest mode, it's 17 channels. If you're running it in basic mode, it's 32 channels. If you are running this in extended mode, it's 89 channels for one fixture. Okay? And if you're running it in what they refer to as ludicrous mode, it's 512 channels for one light. It's a little ridiculous. Or that's your whole universe. That's exactly it. So there you go. Things can expand quite a bit. That is a Martin fixture that has a network jack on it so that you can run data into it to get the maximum effect out of this. Are we good so far? All right. Let's talk about additive versus subtractive color mixing. Okay? We're going to start with, I said that we have a par fixture over here. So I'm going to an old school Fresnel fixture. So I'm going to turn that one on. So many of you were probably very familiar with this. Logan, can we kill the psych stuff, please? Oh, there goes my microphone. Okay, thank you. So this is a 500 watt Fresnel fixture, pretty standard. I'm sure that many of you have seen these before in your community theaters, or lots of schools use these. This has an output that's approximately 3200 Kelvin. And it's often considered, kind of a baseline white for a lot of theatrical purposes. Okay? If I take this gel, this is a Roscoe R26, and I drop that in there, then that is subtracting the other colors and allowing the red to pass through. Does that make sense? All right. This is a color chart that Roscoe produces for the Roscoe Lux R26 light red gel. This is often considered by a lot of theaters as kind of a primary red. It's not actually a primary red, it's very close though, but it's used often for theater because it's close to being a primary red without cutting out so much light that it's not useful. You'll notice that there's a fair amount of orange or a bunch of amber in there, and then it peaks up as red. That's the light that is being passed through this. But you'll also notice that there's some purple that's being passed through there on the other end, some violet. Okay? Interesting? Let's take that one down. Let's go to the next light. So I've already thrown in a Roscoe R80 gel into this one. And this, again, is considered often to be a primary blue. You'll see that we don't have quite as much intensity that's coming out of this. You'll see we've got a lot more blue, a lot more violet, and then we've got, interestingly enough, some red that's also being passed with that blue color. The next one, we've thrown up a similar fixture. Oh, sorry, let me go back and take out that one. And this is a green. And it's interesting what is being passed there. You'll notice a couple things. One, we still have a little bit of violet coming through, which is always interesting to me. But another thing is that we have a lot less light coming through on this in that greeny bluey sort of an area, right? These are the colors that a lot of lighting designers will say, if we get a call from elementary or high school or community theater and they say, we're looking for primary colors, these are the three. Roscoe, R26, R80, R90. These are the most common ones. And when we take all of these together, so each of these is subtracting light, if we put them all up together, then you'll notice that we're kind of sort of-ish white. Kind of sort of-ish, right? The thing is that for some reason, we always convince ourselves, or a lot of times we convince ourselves that if I take red light, blue light, and green light of whatever, I'm going to get white, because back in art class in high school, when I mixed those things together, then in theory I was supposed to get white, right? Not so much. Partly because, as we already looked at here, they're not perfect. None of them are perfect, okay? And you say, well, Carl, why does this matter? Well, it matters because we're doing it with red, green, and blue Fresnels here with gel, but we do this all the time now with LED fixtures. So let's take these three out. So 7 through 9, there we go. And then I'm going to jump back to my other fixture. And we'll go back to red. And now I'm going to add green. And I'm going to add blue. And how white does that look? You think so? That looks pretty purple to me. Right? So this is part of the reason that this manufacturer has chosen to add in a white LED to try to help to counter that when you're wanting to get a white color. So this manufacturer of a fixture that is not an overly expensive light, but not a bad light at all, actually, but not an overly expensive light. But when you start mixing these colors, then there's something coming out of there. Now, that's not necessarily white. So you say, okay, well, why does that matter, Carl? It matters because when you're choosing a fixture and you're trying to figure out how do I match these different things, then you need to be thinking how that works. Because if I take this light from one manufacturer and this light from this manufacturer, the reds that each manufacturer chose are going to be different. The blues are going to be different, the greens are going to be different, et cetera, et cetera. And they're not all going to be perfect. None of them are that perfect primary blue, red, green, whatever. Now I can see a whole bunch of dots and I don't see any of you. So, is that good? Does that make sense? All right. We are going to talk about a couple of other things, then we're going to come back to some other color discussion, which will go right into this. So, number 4, power. So this is an interesting conversation that we've been having with people lately, because I think that often back in the day when we were doing everything with conventional fixtures, we talked about power a lot more. When we started using LED fixtures more, everybody just said, well, you can run as many LEDs as you want. There's no problem. We've got, tons and tons. So just some really, really quick talking about power. I am not an electrician. I am not an electrical engineer. I used to work with one, but with an electrician, not an engineer. But I can tell you that this is the pretty simple stuff. This is the easiest parts of this. So watts divided by volts is going to give you the number of amps, or the equipment is going to, divided by the intensity of that power, the volts, is going to give you the amount of power that's being used, or what's going to be limited by your breaker. Okay, does that make sense? So let's kind of go through this. If we have, come on, click thing. If we have a fixture, especially an old school Parr fixture or old school Fresnel that we would have used in theatrical purposes, that old school theatrical fixture at 1,000 watts divided by 120 volts, which is what typically we see in Canada, right? We are going to be somewhere in the area of about 8.3 amps. That's math that's pretty easy to do. 1,000 divided by 120 is going to tell you how many amps. So it's pretty quick math to say that I can't put two 1,000 watt bulbs onto a 15 amp breaker. Is everybody with me on that? As soon as somebody tries to plug a second 15 in there, or sorry, a second 1,000 watt, then we run into a problem. Okay? And again, this is the kind of thing that in this world, we saw a lot of this over the years, for sure. A 575 watt bulb. 575 watt bulb is what a Source 4 is based on. And the ETC Source 4, when that came out in the 90s, it revolutionized everything because you had a 575 watt bulb that would output close to a 1,000 watt, but we now had it down at 575 watts. Divide that by 120, you're down to 4.8. So in theory, you could put 3 of those onto a 15 amp circuit. See how that changes things a lot? Okay. Oh, right there. There's the 3 of them. So you take 3 of those and put them together. Now, there's an important thing to keep in mind here. If you go and talk to an electrical engineer, or you talk to an electrician, one of the things that they always tell you is you have to keep in mind the 80% rule. Because commercial, standard, residential breakers, if you go to Home Depot, if you run to Electrazad or one of the wholesalers and you say, I just need a breaker for my square D panel, or I just need one for my whatever panel, that 15 amp breaker is actually, yeah, it's 15. Yes, it's labeled 15, but they're expecting that you are not going to run it out at 15 amps all the time. It is going to get really hot if you do that, and it will pop. Flip, whatever you want to term you want to use for that breaker. It is supposed to be running no more than approximately 80%. And so for a lot of times, if we're running, let's say we were renting out some fixtures like these ones, and you use them with a dimmer pack like the one on the floor, and you plugged it in for a school show or for something like that. Well, if the light levels are changing and this light is up at 100%, and these lights are at 60%, then you were still underneath that, and it usually is okay-ish until somebody pushes all of them on at the last end of the show, and then the breakers go, or something of the sort. There are breakers that are rated 100%. That's a whole other discussion. They're usually much more expensive, and we use them in in theatrical applications all the time. They're also used in commercial applications. This is also part of the reason a lot of people will use 20 amp breakers for theatrical applications. Okay? All right. Let's spin this around. So if you remember how math works from elementary school, we can spin around the equation and say voltage times amperage equals watts. So 120 volts times 15 amps we can go up to approximately 1800 watts. 120 volts times 20 amps, about 2400 watts. And again, we need to consider the 80% rule. Okay? So that's old school stuff. And you say, that's great, Carl. Don't care about old school stuff, except many of your theaters still have that. Many schools still have that. Some churches still have that. So it's something that you definitely want to consider. In fact, of the people I know in this room, I think most of you still have conventional fixtures. So you need to be considering that, right? But what about LED fixtures? If I take a fixture like this one, this is the ETC Color Source PAR. We've sold a bazillion of these things, and they're great. This fixture, let's take a look at this one and see what does it draw. Well, first of all, a couple things you should know. This light is a red, green, blue, lime fixture. It does have a fan, so it's going to be drawing a little bit of power because of the fan. But the fan is really, really quiet, like really quiet. And what was the other thing you should know about this? I think that's it. So if we take a look at this and we look at the spec sheet, and I know that this is going to be really tough for some of you that are sitting over here, so I'll try to explain it. This is the cut sheet from the manufacturer on their website. This is the third page, I think, near the top. And the first thing I want to point out for you is right here. It says fixtures per circuit, 9 on a 15 amp power through connector. So you can have 9 of these that you can daisy chain together. If we look at the back here, then you can see that we can daisy chain these together by coming power in on the one side, power out on the next, and keep going. If you look at it theoretically, I can just keep going and going and going and keep plugging them in. The reason that light flashed is because I unplugged that. That's why. But I can only do 9. Okay? And you might look at that and go, wait a minute, that math doesn't work out. We'll talk about that in a second. Number 2, this is an interesting piece that doesn't matter so much, but just something to keep in mind. Almost every manufacturer of theatrical fixtures that we work with today build their fixtures for the international market. So their fixtures will accept power between 100 volts and up to 240 volts so that they don't have to put different power supplies for Europe or for Asia versus North America. Okay? But it does affect how the math is done. If we look at this part, current draw, 0.75 amps at 120 volts. So they've done the math for us. You'll note that they don't really point out there how many watts, because what's more interesting is how many amps when I'm putting that onto my 15 amp or my 20 amp breaker. Okay? Because otherwise I have to do the math with watts. So this fixture is supposed to be 0.75. Now if I do 0.75 times 9, that doesn't come up to 15 amps. Right? It does not. So why is that? Well, what they're doing is they're saying, well, the power that's coming in and then going back out again, and you're looping it in here, the lowest piece, or the piece that's going to break the chain there, is actually the jumper that's inside the fixture that's going from here to here. So if they don't have a wire that's in here that's going to be suitable for daisy chaining up to the maximum for a 15 amp circuit, then they're going to tell you that you should max out at 9. And this is where it's really interesting, because you could do the math and say it's 0.75 and just, well, how many can I put on a 15 amp circuit and back it out? Yes, you can put that on that one circuit, but that doesn't mean you should be daisy chaining them up to that point. That might mean that you have 2 chains of them coming off of the same outlet. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's basically that. This is kind of an interesting thing. Wattage typical. So it gives you a bit of an idea. What they're saying when it says wattage typical is they're saying it could be a little bit lower, it could be a little bit higher, but they don't know what color you're in, and they don't know whether or not the fan is running full blast or not. It depends. And that's going to have an impact on how much wattage you're going to be drawing. That is actually a number that ETC as a manufacturer doesn't care about so much. They put that in there so that if you're comparing it to another manufacturer who is basing all their stuff on how bright the fixture is based on watts, not on lumens, then you can look at that and say, well, it's a 90 watt fixture. That's basically it. This is a really interesting piece that you may want to just keep in mind. It says 35 amps at 120 volts. The math doesn't work. Because you look at that and go, wait a minute, how can this fixture be driving 35 amps with its inrush, but only be 0.75 amps when it's running typically? Almost everything electronics has some sort of a kick when it first comes on. Okay? Motors are bad for that. There's all kinds of things that when they start, the electronics has an instantaneous rush in. And that's the rush. The rush is 35 amps. That doesn't mean you need to have a 40 amp breaker in front of these so that you can run them. It doesn't mean that if you have 9 of these, you have to have 35 times 9. You don't have to have a 200, 300, whatever it is, amp breaker in front of this for it to work. But you do need to be aware that there is going to be that inrush. Most of the time, we can ignore that. We can base our information off of the fixtures per circuit, and we can look at the current draw and do our math from there and decide what's important. Does that make sense? All right? It's getting a little heavy on this stuff. Sorry. Yes, sir.
The only question I have is, what would determine why there be such an increase in the inrush?
Why would there be such an increase for the current? Yeah. First of all, we didn't throw the microphone at you, but that's okay. That's all right. What would be determining that? Yeah. You know what? I'm not an electronics guy when it comes to that.
What condition in the use of the lamp or the light would cause that? Just because of the high intensity when it turned on?
I'm going to say something, and then I'm going to sound stupid, so I'm going to say, somebody else should answer that question for you, not me. But that's probably the easiest answer. Yeah,
Carl,
Bob.
When we got those...
Yeah, do you have... Hold on a second, Bob. We're going to give you the catch box. There you go. Talking to the black part.
Into the black part.
There you go.
Okay. When we got those color source spots, we were worried about that because we had them on an 8-channel splitter.
Yep.
And Mike, the guy that was doing all the electrical work,
Yeah.
was saying, "Wait a minute, this is wrong." So we actually called ETC, and they said, "Don't worry about it."
Yeah.
They said, "Just disregard that."
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's not...
But he didn't explain the like why it was so high. I kind of wondered myself, but
That's the kind of thing that you want to talk to your electrical engineer about.
yeah,
But
yeah.
but we don't need to worry about it typically. Yeah. Cool. Thank you. Any other questions? No? Oh, yep.
Well, Carl, I was just going to say, what happens if you have like 30 lights and you fire them all up at once?
Well, so in some cases, if you take a whole bunch of lights and you fire them all at once, it can definitely be an issue. But if you're following the rules that they have here, like 9 fixtures per circuit, and you're paying attention to those things, then it's not typically any sort of an issue. I was talking to somebody recently, and they were saying that there was an issue on a different project, but it was a project where it was a film shoot, and the amount of wattage that we're talking about, or the amount of amperage that was being drawn at that time, was astronomically larger than anything we're talking about now. It was a film shoot thing where they were trying to make it look like daytime outside and all that kind of stuff. So it was a totally different animal. But okay, all right. Are we good with that power stuff? We can keep moving on. All right, we're up to number 5. Power cables and connectors. How much more boring can we get? So I have all kinds of props tonight. This is a typical U-ground connector, 15 amp straight blade connector. Technically, this is a 15 amp, 120 volt straight blade connector from, in this case, it's Hubble, I guess. Nope, this is not Hubble. Somebody from Hubble's now upset at me. It's the one that you find in your house, right? Pretty standard. The other end of this, we'll talk about in a minute. This is a U-ground female connector, okay? Pretty standard, again, in your house. Lots of you will have had this in your church or in your school or community theater. This is a 20 amp twist lock connector. Again, a type that many people will have in their theater or in their church or their school. The 20 amp twist lock connector has become, in a lot of ways, the standard in Canada for being able to, for theatrical applications. It's not necessarily the standard across the US. They've got some other things. They do use these, but they also do some other things. But it's become the standard in a lot of ways because it's a twist lock connector, meaning that you plug it in and it twists so that in theory it's not going to pull out and fall out, whereas a straight blade connector could. And it's a 20 amp, so this meets a lot of code requirements if you're in a theater that was built in the 90s or in the 80s, where you're having 20 amp feeds to a bunch of lights, and now this meets the code. Does that make sense? So many of you probably have these in your schools or churches or theaters, but then we often have these adapters to go to U-ground connectors so that we can plug in other things. Now, is this wrong? Is this right, wrong, or otherwise? Well, that depends. Exactly. Thank you. It depends on a lot of different things. If you are going to draw 20 amps from this connector, then yeah, that's going to be a problem. The industry has done a lot of this stuff. Is an electrical inspector going to be happy with you? You're probably going to get a stern look. There's going to be some discussion to be had, but this is a pretty standard thing that gets used in the industry. Well, it would be cool if that's where everything kind of stopped and it was pretty simple. When we start to get into LED fixtures, it can get a little bit weirder from there. So this, see, I told you, lots of props. This is a standard cable that would come with many LED fixtures today, okay? It has a U-ground connector on one end. Again, usually if you're from the US, you might call this an Edison connector, okay? And then on the other end, it has a blue PowerCon connector on it. The blue PowerCon connector is a 20 amp connector, okay? And this is a locking connector built by Nutric. There are a few different knockoffs of it, but it's a locking connector that goes into the back of the light. This was introduced maybe 15 years ago, something of that sort, and it became the standard for so many different fixtures. And it's pretty cool. It gets used for a lot of different things. And I'm just going to bounce ahead here in a couple of slides, and that's where we're at. So this connector had some issues. The biggest one being that if I grab the back of this and I pull the little tab and I turn it, one of the things that's really important that you probably have never really paid attention to is you see how the ground pin on this is longer than it is on everything else? Do you know why that is? The point is that when you plug this into the wall, then the ground is making connection first. And when you pull it out, the ground is making connection last. The theory being that that's going to keep you safe, okay, while you're pulling it in and pulling it out. These connectors do not terminate the ground first or last, which means that it's not made to be a way of disconnecting power when it's live. You're supposed to turn the power off in front of it before you use it. Well, how many people do you think do that? Nobody does. So they had to come up with a new connector. They came up with a new connector. This one's black on this fixture. They're black and orange, but they're the same connector essentially. And they are called True 1 connectors. So they are the PowerCon True 1 connector. Again, it's a 20 amp connector. They also added some other things in that now it is also IP rated, meaning that you can use it outside. Okay. And then there's in and outs. So we used to have, with PowerCon, we had blue in, gray out, and these are still connectors that are used on lots of things. But we used to have this, so it was pretty easy, in and out. But there was another problem with those in that if you had a blue one and a gray one, they don't mate, which is kind of a pain in the neck. Because if you need to extend them, they don't work that way. You have to actually use an adapter to extend those. Okay? Whereas True 1 connectors, they do mate, so you can extend them. So this is a PowerCon connector, 20 amp connector, often found like this, although we do sometimes use them with a twist lock on one end and a blue PowerCon on the other end. I will point out that that connector has recently been replaced with an updated version. I thought I had one right here. Did I drop it? Right here. So they've made them less blue with a blue band on them still. And the corresponding gray one is basically the same. So it is, they're black with a gray band on them. And we're still seeing from some manufacturers, we get some of one, some of the other. I think we've got some out back actually that are adapters that have this connector on one end and then they've got a standard gray on the other end. So a lot of manufacturers are working through their back stock. Okay. This blue PowerCon to True 1. They're just adapters. There's no reason that you can't go out of this fixture into this fixture. In fact, that's exactly what we're doing here. Okay, they're both 20 amp fixtures. We can come into this one with just standard power, jump out of this into this, convert it. We're using PowerCon on one end, True 1 on one end, PowerCon on the other, and then through. Is that making sense? Don't let the connectors get you all muffled up. If you're not sure which one to use, then feel free to give us a call. But for the most part, this is still just, they're still just standard cables. That last one there is not a 20 amp cable. Sorry, my label is incorrect. Okay? But yeah, just be aware that it's just lines through. All right? Does that make sense? Okay. Lots and lots of different adapters and cables and things. Trying to think if there's, here's one thing I can just show you with this. So yeah, so this is a True 1 jumper cable again with the older orange True 1 connectors, and these ones can plug together and they do clip together nicely, so you can use those for extending. And again, they're great because they do have that rubber shroud on them if you're using them for outdoor applications, which we do regularly. All right, more stuff on the floor. That takes us to another discussion. So we're coming back to the DMX discussion, talking about XLR5 and XLR3 cable. What's an XLR3 cable? What's it most commonly used for? Microphones, that's right. So the XLR3 connector, which if you believe the legends or some Wikipedia page, XLR, the name XLR because that was the product code for a specific manufacturer, and it just became the standard name for all of these types of locking connectors. A 3-pin XLR connector is what a lot of people think that's the only XLR connector in the world. The truth is that there are lots of XLR connectors. I have seen, you don't see them very common. There is an XLR2, and if you want to see one later, I can show you an XLR 10 that I have at my desk, which is ridiculous. But there's a whole bunch of them, and they all are this standard size. They all have that standard size. From a distance, you can't necessarily tell the difference between this or another one from anywhere. So this is an XLR3, this is an XLR5. You're all too far away to notice, so I could be telling you whatever, but that's what they are, okay? The cables themselves, and I can pass them around if you'd like, the cables themselves look an awful lot alike. This is a microphone cable, this is a DMX cable. So what's the difference? Well, one of the most common things that people think is that an XLR5 is made for lighting because, well, it must be doing something fancy. That's not necessarily true. The connector is not what makes this cable fancy or not. The pinout for standard DMX, again, one universe of DMX, you're all experts in that now, so I don't need to explain that. One universe of DMX is passing down a cable using 3 wires. Pin 1 is ground, pin 2 is data negative, and pin 3 is data positive. It doesn't matter if that is an XLR3 connector or an XLR5 connector, or actually there's other connectors that we do use for DMX occasionally. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that those 3 pins are passed through all the way. So then why is it that so many fixtures in the industry are using XLR5? Or maybe another question might be, why do so many people try to use XLR3 for this? Well, cable is the issue. When USIT came up with the DMX standard, they said DMX was going to pass on an XLR5 cable because they made the assumption that what was going to happen is they were going to, at some point in time in the future, come up with a way for these fixtures, or back then the dimmers, to talk back to the control systems. So they left those 2 additional pins with the idea that one day they will use those 2 pins. Some manufacturers came up with different ways of doing that. They were pretty proprietary, and they said, oh, this is going to work. We're going to do it like this. Colortran did a thing. Strand did a thing. Different companies did their things. Overall, as an industry, nobody accepted it. Nobody said this is going to become the standard. So those 2 pins, pins 4 and 5, essentially became abandoned. They just sit there. Some manufacturers will actually share the ground pin, and then they use pins 4 and 5 to send 2 universes down, and then use like a little Y cable thing, not a DMX Y cable, a Y cable thing. Anyway, it's really a breakout more than it is a Y cable. Okay? And so that breaks out. But the thing is that there are a lot of DJs in the world who have a lot of XLR cable, and a lot of bands in the world who have a lot of XLR cable, and they want to be able to run lighting on that. And when a lot of LED fixtures, when a lot of moving light fixtures and dimmers and that kind of thing came out, a lot of manufacturers said, hey, you know what? We can put XLR3 on things. We'll just tell people, make sure you use DMX. Make sure you use real DMX cable. And they would run whatever they wanted. And here's the problem. And this is the one Logan said, why on earth is that slide in there? This is kind of what it's like. See, if you're driving down the highway and you're running on your donut, on your spare tire, then can you get where you need to go? Yes. Do you risk possibly blowing your tire because you know that most of them are rated that you're only supposed to run no more than 100 kilometers on that tire? And you're not supposed to go more than 80 kilometers an hour. Well, running on XLR3 cable or running on microphone cable for DMX is only going to get you so far. Is it going to work? Probably. Until it doesn't. Yes. And when it doesn't, it is a huge pain in the butt and it will create all kinds of headaches for you. Usually because of that guy Murphy and his laws, it is likely to work until the doors open of your show. And then it's not going to work because that's just the way these things work. It's really about the cable. Microphone cable is analog. It's a 22 gauge 2-conductor wire. And I'm talking about standard microphone cable, like the kind of microphone cable that we use for installations all the time, the kind of cable that you buy off the shelf from wherever, hopefully from Horizon, but maybe from somewhere else. It's just mic cable. It's not a big deal, okay? Yes, there is more expensive microphone cable. You can get into star quad cable and you can get into some funky things like that, which interestingly enough is actually a spec. Star quad cable is almost exactly the same as a DMX cable. So you can actually use star quad cable from Canair and get really close to DMX. DMX is a digital protocol. It's running off of a specific wire. In most applications, it's a 22 gauge twisted pair cable with low impedance. And there's lots of specifications you can look up on that. It is a different kind of wire. Am I going to stand here and say, you need to go and rip out any wire that's in your place and make sure that you change it? Probably not. That's not really helping us in any way, and it's not helping you in any way. But I can tell you that having real DMX cable in your system, that's the way the manufacturer intended it to be. That's the way that the console manufacturer is expecting that their data is going to be sent. That's the way that the fixture manufacturers are expecting to see the information come through. Okay? When CITT put together the specification for DMX and said you can put 32 fixtures on a run, they're expecting you're using the proper cable. Okay? Does that make sense? Just like when your manufacturer said you can drive this fast on the highway with your car, they weren't expecting you to do it on your donut. Same thing. Okay? All right. How are we doing so far? We're up to numbers. Oh, question. Do you have the catch box? Oh man, there it is.
Can you tell by the black wire which one it is?
That's a good question. So can you tell if you just pick up the cable itself and look at it? Not always. So sometimes you can. It depends on the manufacturer. This wire says right on it, Digiflex Lumi LF22 2WS for the 2 twisted pairs. So this one's actually a 22 gauge, not 24 gauge. And it actually says DMX wire. So that's their intention. And it's interesting because it actually says low voltage computer cable. Okay? Where this one says specifically on it, Digiflex professional microphone cable. So some of them will actually say that right on it. But this isn't hard to do. Sometimes it's a little bit more of a thing. But if you open up the connector, and you should be able to do this without wrecking the cable at all. If you do, let's put it this way. If you open up the XLR connector and it falls apart, you probably should have fixed it already. So, now you found your problem before it happened. If you take a look at it, you should be able to tell within reason when you look at this whether or not those pairs are twisted. You can't always, depending on how it was trimmed back and everything, but you may be able to tell. Okay?
The reason why I ask is because somewhat ago, I guess two plays ago, we had some old razors which we used to use as psych lights, and
Yep.
we used them for a different purpose. And for some reason, one of them would not work. And I kept on changing wires and changing wires and changing wires, and eventually found one that worked. And I'm just wondering whether that had something to do with it.
That's
all
interesting.
of a sudden it worked, and before it did not work when I had a different kind of cable on it.
Interesting. Is it XLR 3 or XLR 5 jumping in between them?
3.
Okay. How long is the run?
No more than 6 feet.
Between each of the fixtures, or how long is the full run from the...
A full run would be 8 feet.
So from where the
From
first...
the first one is daisy chained to the last one.
There's only 8 feet?
Yeah.
So there's only 8 feet of cable jumping between them?
Yes.
Okay, I'm misunderstanding something there. So how many feet of cable total if you added up all the cable between it?
From the console.
From the console.
Oh, I don't know how much from the console. It's quite a lot.
Quite a lot, yeah. So it could be the distance. It could be the type of cable. But there is another thing that we're not talking about tonight and I don't have a slide for this, but there's DMX terminators. So DMX terminators in a lot of digital networks that are straight networks like this, you need to put a terminator at the end of the data line. And you need to do that so that it terminates the line and tells it this is where it's stopping. Now, this was more of an issue back in the 90s and the early 2000s when the electronics that were in these devices weren't as good as they are today. And frankly, we used a lot junkier wire for this kind of thing. But certainly, without a DMX terminator at the end, sometimes on long runs, it can be an issue. So it may be the kind of thing where it was the cable, or it may be the kind of thing that if you put a DMX terminator at the end, then that would have cleaned things up. A terminator is essentially, it looks like an XLR connector with no cable on it, just the connector itself, and it has a resistor between two of the pins. 120 ohm resistor just between the two pins. And that's it. And that will often clean up a lot of problems. And if you look at the DMX spec, it says that you should use that on every line. The problem is that sometimes that can actually also show up. It can also exhibit other weird things sometimes if you don't need it. And so the general rule of thumb around the professional lighting industry is if you don't have any problems, don't use a terminator. If you do have a problem, put in the terminator and see what happens. That could be the issue. And a terminator is usually like $15 or $20. And many of our clients have those in their kits, and they use them if they need them and don't if they don't. And then in other ones, they say, you know what, we're going to terminate every line, and that's totally fine. It all depends. Yes, Mr. Hume.
We ran into a problem like that. We ran into a problem like that last year. We only had 3 dimmers on the line, right. And it was under 100 feet total. But the one at the end wouldn't work.
Right.
And so we went, got a dimmer, or got a terminator, plugged it in, bingo.
Yeah.
And I thought because there's only 3 things, but I think it's because the signal was so strong because there was only 3 dimmers on it that it was reflecting, so it would jump out.
It's interesting because sometimes that's 100% true, and other times it's like, well, why is this doing this? It doesn't make sense because
it was a head scratcher.
Yeah, sometimes it can be a head scratcher, but certainly DMX terminators can fix some problems. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. We're going to move on to something completely different now. LED fixtures and barn doors. This is a fun conversation because it's sometimes just misremembered or misunderstood. So if I take this fixture right here and actually we'll jump through the next slide there. If I take this fixture here, this is the color source par. Did that turn on? Nope. Oh, I have to actually turn up the intensity. Is that better? So if I take this light, I'm going to spin it around over here. And if I say, well, I want to be able to shape this light, I can't just take a barn door and shape the light because there are 8 different elements here. What it would require is for me to have a little barn door on each one of these to shape that light, which would look really fun, but would be a little bit ridiculous, and it wouldn't be overly helpful, right? So we can't really do that. One of the things that we keep looking for is fixtures that will accomplish that in a much cleaner manner. This is an example of that. This is an ETC color source V Fresnel. And this fixture does not have the traditional Fresnel lens like you see on the left-hand side, but it also doesn't have the multiple element sort of a lens. It has a lens that is kind of a piece of plastic, actually, that's in the front there. We can do some interesting things with this because we can zoom it in and out, which is great. And if I spin this one around, as Jordan pointed out, we have to spin them the right way, or otherwise I'm going to end up with a mess. Somebody's going to get hurt. So with this, now I can actually use it like a traditional barn door. Okay? And this is a really quick one. This is one of the shortest pieces we're going to talk about, but this is an important thing to consider. Okay? If you are looking to do a theatrical type application and you are using an LED par style fixture, you're not going to be able to create do anything with the light when you need to because of that. Okay? Does that make sense? Yes, Bob.
Has anybody come up with a workable workaround for the multi-element?
A workable workaround for the multi-element.
Yeah, like a barn door kind of a thing.
Can we talk about that in a minute?
Yeah.
All right, we'll talk about that in a minute. So, see how we're just flying along here to color matters. This is the only slide for this one. Color matters because of this, and we've already kind of talked about this a little bit. If we look at this fixture, again, I'm going to try to spin it around the right way and be smart about this. If we look at this light and the white light that's coming out of this fixture, this is, if I go to here, this is essentially the manufacturer's idea of what white is. Does that look reasonable coming out of there? I know we're just going up into the ceiling, but looking at the front of that, does that look not so bad? If we go again to our fixture number 5, and there we go, you can see that this is not the same, right? Now that's not, sorry, I don't want to blind anybody. This one is really wide. That's not to say that I can't get something a little bit closer to being reasonable with this fixture, but it's still not going to be the same. What has happened is that this is a theatrical lighting manufacturer that's looked at the fixture and said, we are going to use this fixture and we're going to say the red, the green, and the blue, we're not going to max them out to just see how bright can we make them. We're going to try to make them even so that the amount of red, the amount of green, and the amount of blue when you are at full is going to give you a reasonable white light. And they're doing math within the fixture to make that work. This fixture is actually not just red, green, and blue. This fixture is red, green, blue, indigo, and lime. And they're using each of those colors to be able to create that effect. So why do we like this fixture? Well, we like this one because if you are in a small application with low ceilings, like many of our schools and some of our smaller churches, then this is really handy, and our smaller community theaters. I mean, Itopa, low ceiling. Then it's really great because this fixture is really nice and wide, and it's even. And you can put a barn door on this fixture. And so I can look past the color to an extent and work with it to try to get it so that it's a pretty reasonable sort of a warm white-ish. I would have to work with this a bit more maybe, but I can work with this to get it to a point that it's a light that I'm reasonably happy with if what I need is wider. Okay? So when I say that color matters, the first thing is, can you get a reasonable white out of the light to be able to make people look good or whatever else it is that you're lighting? So many times people look at it and go, oh, well, the spec sheet says it's red, green, blue, and white, so I'll be able to get what I want. That's not the case. You really should be looking at it or be talking to somebody that understands what they're talking about when they're looking at this stuff for you. Okay? That's the first one. The second one is, how are they actually making up this color? How are they creating that color? So for instance, this is using a lime and this is using a white. This doesn't have a white LED, but this is using white. This one's using white to be able to create that, to add that additional white in there. We're not going to get into it tonight, but you can look into the charts for each of these different manufacturers, any of the reputable manufacturers, and they will show you. Remember we were looking at the colors for the Fresnels and how those gels worked? You can see how the red, green, blue, white, or red, green, blue, indigo, lime, how those work to be able to create those different colors. And how they work will be an indication as to what's going to happen to the people and to the things that are being lit. Are they going to look flat? Are you going to be able to get a red that is vibrant? Like, is your t-shirt going to look red or is it going to look flat? Right? It's going to be different depending on what you're doing. That is why some of our theater clients, like the folks at the Stratford Festival, will spend 2 or 3 times as much money on a fixture because they are looking to be able to hit certain colors and have those colors stand out. Whereas if that's not the primary concern for you, then you may not be as nearly as worried about it. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions about color? No? There isn't...
I think if you experiment...
You're going to get hit with a microphone just in a second here, Bob. There you go.
I think if you experiment...
Maybe we should just leave the microphone at you.
Yeah. I talk too much.
I didn't say that.
You implied it.
I did not.
No. I think if you experiment enough with the colors and getting the color right on costumes and stuff, you can make certain people, certain costumes pop.
Yes.
Even with like cheaper fixtures. I know like it's at the Grand in Stratford. I mean they've got the great equipment there to do it. But I think the small theaters, schools, churches can, if you fool around with it enough, you can get that same pop. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that you can get a good pop. Is it going to be exactly the same? I think what's interesting is the fixtures that are lighting me tonight, the 4 fixtures that are lighting here are ETC Source 4 LED Series 1. When those fixtures came out, everybody was like, oh my goodness, that's amazing. That is amazing, the color that you can get out of those lights. Because at that point, nobody was doing it. But this fixture here, which is a less expensive fixture, this is the ETC Color Source Spot, actually the older version, this is the original Color Source Spot, has as good or better color than that does, and it's brighter. I think that, yes, Bob's right. You can achieve a ton with a fixture like this, a fixture like this, a fixture like this, or this. You can go a long, long way and get some really, really great effects. Especially when you're doing things like this. If you're using, I don't want to blind anybody, but like that deep sort of indigo blue that you can get out of this, that there's no way you're going to get that out of your 500 watt Fresnels. You can get some effects that compared to a 500 watt Fresnel, it just blows you away. The problem, like anything, is that a Honda Accord is an awesome car until you sit into something else. That's and until you sit into Bob's Volvo. That's right. But yeah, I mean, it's all a matter of how far do you want to go. But can a fixture like this create some great art? Absolutely. And this enters into a conversation that we talk about often around here at Horizon, and that is that we are never going to tell you need to buy that $3,000 fixture to light your stage when the $1,400 fixture is going to do just fine, or the $800 fixture is going to work just fine for the kind of goals that you have for the theater you're producing, the ministry that you're doing at your church, the theater you're doing at your school, or the teaching that you're doing at your school. We're going to try to make sure that we're scaling that with you. Okay? Does that make sense? Now, we might tell you that you should buy the $1,200 light for other reasons, but it's not going to be because of we're trying to upsell you. Okay? Does that make sense? You got the mic. Anything else you want to say, Bob? No? Okay. Okay, you hold on to that. All right. So I would say that the number one thing that I think that our clients don't do as much as they should is use gobos. So this is always an interesting conversation that I have, and I've gone to a few different places, to schools and to community theaters. Especially, it's always interesting to me when I go to community theaters where the community theater has been doing theater for years and years and years, and they do great shows every year, and lots of people come and everything else. And I say, do you know what a gobo is? Do you use gobos? And they look at me like I've got 3 heads. And they're like, what are you talking about? What is a gobo? First of all, nobody knows what gobo means. Don't believe anybody who tells you gobo means go between. It goes, go between the lenses, go between. Go and look at the Wikipedia page. There's like 3 or 4 different explanations as to what the word gobo means, because nobody really knows. It's a slang that's been around for a long, long time. Somebody's last name. That's a good possibility. It's very possible. So the way I like to describe this is usually this. This is the easiest way for me to tell people who've never seen a gobo. What is the most famous gobo? Hands down, the most famous gobo, no doubt about it. But this is one of my favorite parts about this gobo. That's impossible. It doesn't work. You can't do that. That's not the way gobos work, because a gobo fits inside the fixture, between the light source and the lens. You can see right here, we are projecting the horizon gobo here. This piece of glass is stuck inside the fixture. It is between the light source, in this case the LED, and the lensing. That's the way gobos have to work. It does not work like this. If you would like to know more about why the bat symbol doesn't work, this is an aside. There's this YouTuber named the Hacksmith. He's out of Kitchener. If you go and check out his 37-minute video on them building a bat symbol, you can do that. It's from a couple of years ago, and it's pretty great. You can just search up Hacksmith. You'll have to scroll a little bit because it's from a couple of years ago. But they built one. The disclaimer, the spoiler, is that the bat symbol on the front is just for fun. The gobo itself is inside the middle of the fixture. Okay? All right. So getting back to this. Gobos come in all kinds of different shapes and sizes. And if you have not seen a gobo before, I can pass around a couple of different gobos that I think are cool. I will pass around a couple of them. These are, so there's some glass ones there. There's some steel ones. These are different ones that we have used for different shows and things. Oh, those are actually exactly the same, so I'll take that one. So these are different gobos. Some of those are custom. Some of those are just stock gobos that we've used for different things. And gobos are great because you can make all kinds of stuff out of them. You'll see that some of them are glass, some of them are steel. And I think all of those are fairly new, so they don't have a whole lot of burning on them or anything, or they've been within a fixture only for a short period or within an LED fixture. Oh, Peter, if you drop it and you break it, you bought it.
Always wanted to buy something.
You always wanted to buy something. So you'll notice some different sizes there. The biggest ones that you've got there are A size. I think I passed it on A size. The next size is a B size, and then there's an M and an E. I don't think I passed it on any E's. The smallest ones you've got there are actually from moving lights. Okay? And the glass ones are kind of cool. I think those glass ones are probably all B size. This glass one here is an A size that fits inside here. And there's a couple of things to note about this gobo. And I'll maybe just hold it up like this. I don't know if you can see this. Can you guys see that? The gobo is upside down, okay? And it's backwards because the lensing, and see, we're talking a lot about school tonight. So I mentioned earlier on the math, that's from elementary school. This is probably from high school. the lensing is going to flip the image. So any gobo that goes in here, it's going to flip this way and this way. So you need to be considering that. When I was doing shows many years ago, and I was doing lots and lots of shows, and you would go and put a gobo in, and you would think, oh yeah, the gobo goes in this direction, and then you realize it's in the wrong way. Then you pull it out really quickly, hoping that you're not going to burn yourself. And more than one time, I've had the gobo melted in my thumb. That hurts. I wouldn't recommend it. The good thing is that with LED fixtures, there's a lot less of an issue with that kind of thing. This, you can do all kinds of different things with different gobos. That one is shifting. 1 second. You know what I'm realizing? Can you guys actually see this on the live stream, Logan?
Yep.
Yep? Okay, cool. So, there's one gobo. You'll notice that I had to change the focus on that because I moved the original Horizon gobo was in the accessory slot on this fixture, and I moved this into the gobo slot. So that's one example of a gobo. This one I really like. It's a palm tree. If it fits in there properly, it's being a pain in the neck. Let's do it this way. Here we go. Palm tree, and I can focus that up. Or I like this one a lot too. And you can adjust this. And of course, you can also still use shutters if you need to. And you can also do some great things because you can take that and go, oh, what happened to the light? Okay, and I can change the color to what I want it to be. When you first walked in here tonight, we had a gobo up on the back wall here. Logan, do you want to throw that up there for just a second? Just a quick sec. Yeah. So that's a gobo from one fixture that is using a 70-degree lens tube. And that 70-degree lens tube does a great job of covering the entire wall. And it looks kind of interesting here. If you turn around and look on the screen here, it looks really great on the camera as well to kind of make the room look a lot bigger than it is. You know, because there's 400 people in this room, obviously. So, so that is that's gobos. And when I say that this is probably one of the number one things that I think our clients should be using more of, it's because there's so many interesting things you can do with gobos, whether it is things like that stop sign, right? Trying to create some sort of signage in your space. Some interesting things. We have a client who a couple of years ago created a QR code gobo. So the QR code was projecting on the wall. This was in one of the schools. I think it was at the University of Toronto, Mississauga. They were projecting on the wall so students can walk in and they can actually, I think it was during a show. I think they were using it for a show. So it was part of the show. So you could scan to find out information, that kind of stuff. So that's pretty cool. You can use gobos where you throw them out of focus and it gives them a completely different sort of a look, right? And here's some examples that I stole from Roscoe, the manufacturer that we get most of our gobos from. And this is these are some pictures from their Instagram from a couple of different shows that have gone on around different places, and different kinds of gobos that get used for different types of things. Some of these are obviously outdoors, and some of them are well, that Romeo and Juliet on a stage. There's all kinds of things. There's definitely a push these days. A lot of people are using them for things like their wedding, and they want to have images that way. Personally, I really like using gobos for creating interesting texture. I think there's all kinds of cool things you can do with that. This is a picture that we just received yesterday from a client. CIBC was doing an event for university students in Waterloo. I'm sure it was a lot to do with give us your money and we'll give you a credit card. but they purchased two custom gobos from us. They used fixtures pretty much exactly the same as this to project these on the side of the building. And it's pretty cool because it's lighting up all of that. A gobo costs like $17 for a standard gobo. And you can do all kinds of neat things with it. And I'm thinking, like, on different kind of stages that you're working on, like Kevin, you guys have all kinds of white on your stage now. There's all kinds of area there. We're doing some interesting projection there. Would be really cool. And I mean, you guys too. Like your stage isn't white, but there's all kinds of room to be able to do interesting things. This is where if you go to a show and they're producing something so it looks like you're in a forest or what have you, that's what they're doing. Okay. All right. Cool. That's gobos. Don't be afraid to play around with them, try them, do some interesting things. I should show you one more thing. Yes, sir. Breakup gobos are awesome. Absolutely. They are super, super useful, and they're pretty standard. This is actually another type of a gobo. This is a colorizer, and depending on how you focus this, you get a different look out of it, because this is actually a piece of glass. So you can
you could do a river with a rotating gobo.
Absolutely.
Like one of those and a rotating one.
Absolutely, you can. So you can do some really interesting things with these, and you can overlay gobos and create some neat stuff. So that's actually you can see it kind of coming through there. That's that flowers with that. And yes, you can use a rotator and create some other things. Okay? All right. Number 10 is focus. I'm going to use the same light and turn this around. And I turned on the hazer because we're going to come back to hazers in a second. So I'm going to spin this around to here. You guys okay back there? All right. I keep moving. I keep changing the amount of light that's happening up here, and it's just driving them nuts. But they'll be fine. They're pros. One of the things that we run into quite regularly is people will say, hey, this is great. I need a spotlight on stage. That looks awesome. The problem is that I need even coverage on stage, and I need it to be soft. And I don't need it to be this because I'm not always doing a vaudeville show, right? So I may want this to be a little bit soft. But the problem is how do you decide what is the right amount of soft? And so one of the things that a lot of professional lighting people do is they will say, you know what, the easiest way to do this is to start off with a sharp edge. And so if you take a shutter partway in and you focus that up to a sharp edge like that, okay? And you do that with all your fixtures. If you do every single one of them exactly like that, then that's pretty easy. You can tell a bunch of volunteers, you can tell a union crew, you can tell whoever to focus those up to the same amount. And then when you take a diffusion gel like this and I drop that in, then I'm going to get exactly the same amount of soft on every single one of my lights. And it's super, super simple. And one of our favorites is to use Roscoe 132. Doesn't really matter. You can use a different Roscoe, you can use a different Lee, you can do whatever. You can use whatever gel you want. But if you always are starting from the same position, from that same sort of thing where you are making sure that you've got a sharp edge, then it's going to be consistent across the board. Does that make sense? There you go. See, some of these are a lot faster than others. Bob asked a question. I know, and you're thinking, which one? Because Bob's talking so much. If we go to here and we go to number 4, and I bring up this light, Bob was asking the question, well, is there something that can be done about these fixtures? And the answer is, well, kind of. And I think that in this case, I'm not going to be telling specifically Mr. Hume anything that he doesn't already know, but perhaps you haven't seen this before. This is a diffusion that's made specifically for theatrical fixtures, and it works quite well because it doesn't cut out a lot of light. And when I drop this in front of here, pardon me? This is a frost. Yep. This one is referred to as a medium round frost. And when I drop that in there, then it spreads out the light without losing a lot of light output. Okay, and it does a reasonable job of smoothing things out. So if I've got fixtures are closer, this is actually, we have a medium oval on the fixtures above me right here. Okay, so to give you an idea as to what a medium oval would look like, that's what this is. And I can actually rotate this, and that's turning the light. And so this is kind of cool because this means that now I can rotate the light to get it so that it's not touching a set piece, or I can get it so that it's not touching a drape line or something like that if I need to. So these are very, very important pieces to be able to use as part of a lighting kit if you're changing things and needing to be able to manipulate the light on stage. So kind of what Bob was asking was, is there a way to take one of these fixtures and to still barn door it? Well, you can see that unfortunately it's still a multi-element fixture, and even if I do try to barn door it, I'm really just cutting out some of the light. So unfortunately the answer is no. Okay?
But the medium oval actually helps.
The medium oval is awesome. Yeah, absolutely. And so this is medium oval. I should say that there is narrow, medium, wide, and extra wide in both round and oval. So there are those options, and these are from ETC, but Roscoe builds some as well, and they're an OptiSculpt is their brand, and that's a pretty cool thing too. Now, they're similar in cost, but they're interesting because you can buy them in different shapes and sizes for different types of fixtures. Okay. All right. So that is number 10, and I said that we had 10, but there has to be a bonus. Well, wait, there's more. So the bonus for tonight is to talk about haze. And I think that hazers are kind of interesting things because, first of all, often people think that they're fog machines. They're not actually, I mean, they are like fog machines, but they're different. Unfortunately, it's more, well, not unfortunately. Fortunately, it's more difficult to explain what a hazer is to some of the younger crowd because when I say it's like a smoky bar, they look at me like I've got two heads. Because what on earth is that like? But that's essentially what we're talking about. It's more like just a haze in the air rather than billowing smoke. So we talk about billowing smoke and smoke machines. We also talk about fog that might lie nice and low, and we've got machines that will do those kinds of things. But haze is great because it just gives you kind of a mist in the air sort of a thing. And this is kind of what you can create with this. And I'm not going to tell you that haze is perfect for every venue because that's not the case. That would be a lie. Am I right into the camera again? Perfect. All right. So if I take this and I throw that in there, and then Logan, I'm not sure, we might have to change the house lighting here a little bit.
We have a Svoboda effect.
Sorry, pardon?
We have a Svoboda effect.
Yeah, can you?
The Russian guy who creates this effect.
Oh, yeah.
A
Yeah.
lot of lightnings in
Yep.
a box to create this same effect.
Right. Yeah. So this gives you kind of an idea. I don't know how well you can see that. You can certainly see it on the camera there. Jordan can see it well because it's right in his eyes. But that gives you a bit of an idea as to what you're going to get. And it's interesting, like the picture that I've got here tonight as the background for all of our slides, that's what people think about when they think about theatrical lights, right? They often look at that and go, that's what stage lighting looks like. And then we often don't even use hazers. Hazers are not right for every show, and you can adjust how much or how little haze. And I've talked more than one church out of buying a hazer because I don't think that it's always the right thing. But I do think that there are some interesting things that can be done, and maybe specifically for specific sorts of shows. I was telling the folks here earlier that I really like using weird things like palm trees in gobo or for gobo projections because I think that they look really kind of interesting. And you may not be able to see it as much if you're sitting, but if you look at the camera there, that you can see that that is kind of a weird sort of an effect. And I like that because I think it's kind of interesting how it's more interesting than just a light. Okay? So that's a combination of using something like a hazer with gobos. And again, is this right for every show? It's unlikely you need a hazer for most Norm Foster plays. But that's not to say that there isn't an application that you can use them for. All right? Cool. I think that covers everything I had for tonight. Is there anything else, Logan? Is there anything else that we talked about that I said I was going to talk about and I haven't talked about it? She's shaking her head no. Does anybody have any other questions? Yes.
You should mention though, on camera, the diffusion doesn't quite look the same as it does in person.
Oh, okay. So Logan's just saying that on camera, the diffusion doesn't read as well as it does in person. So this is another reason why you should come to Horizon rather than just sit at home and watch online, because not only do we have cookies, but you can also see the diffusion better. So a couple of things about the next seminars that we've got coming up. Let's click on here. So some of the next seminars that we've got coming up over the next little while. The live stream video production with David Mann. Dave's going to be coming in and talking about this. Dave has a lot of experience doing some really, really interesting things in the industry, and has some interesting background in in video production and live stream production that I think is going to be really great. And we're always interested in having people outside of Horizon come in and talk and explain some of their experiences. So that's going to be good. And that is here on Tuesday, October the 8th, so a month from now in this room. The next one is going to be with Adrian Sterling. Adrian is not currently like he's going to change anytime immediately, but his current position is he is the sales rep for Meyer, Digico, and DPA microphones. And if you know DPA microphones, they build some really, really cool microphones. And he's going to be coming in and talking about microphone techniques. Specifically, he wants to talk about how you use different microphones to get different sounds. We were having some conversations earlier about maybe having some instruments and setting up some stuff with that. There's still some things we're nailing down with Adrian as to exactly how we're going to do that. We're probably going to put instruments in another room, put a camera on them, et cetera, et cetera. So that'll be cool. And Adrian's an awesome guy. He's a lot of fun, and he'll do a great job. His background is everything from some live touring to doing mixing for the Olympics to, doing all kinds of weird stuff. He's a good guy. He's great. We have just launched our new website. So if you haven't checked it out, definitely check it out. This has been a long, way much longer than it should be, process of building this new website, which is pretty cool. The new site has got a whole bunch of different things going on, and it's not done. We are still adding more things to it. We now have our rental database is on the website, so you can go on there. You can check out everything that we have in rentals, or almost everything we have in rentals. You can look at budget pricing and such. You can also, on the site, you can go through and select different items, and then in there you can build out kind of a quote. It'll email it off to us. We can go back to you and say, oh, you need it for this date to this date. Here's the package price. Logan and Darren and Mark will work through that kind of stuff and get back to you. And it's cool because now you can see a lot of the product that we have, which you couldn't see previously. I can tell you that we have discovered, this is the way these things go, right? You press launch on a website, and then the next day you realize 6 things that just broke. So there are a couple of things on the site that are still a little bit funky, but we're getting there. We have some interesting plans for this site that I think you're going to find interesting. We think it's interesting, so go ahead and take a look at it. If you find anything broken, go ahead and send us an email, and let us know, please. We're finding enough, but you're welcome to tell us about other things. And it's kind of a cool thing that continues to evolve. So please check it out. And I think that's it. Thanks for coming. Thanks for joining us. I can tell you that Resource Stage is not just about these seminars. We do other things as well. I know some of you joined us for the tour that we did for the Grand Theater a couple months ago. We do have other things that are going on. We've got some additional plans. And I can tell you that like 10 years ago, we did a conference at the Grand Theater, and there's discussion about doing it again. 10 years ago, that was a long time ago. We're going to do something like that again. So we're working towards that. All right? Thanks for coming. If you want to stick around, you've got questions. If you want to touch any of this stuff, you're welcome. If you want to check out any more gobos, we've got a whole book of them. If you want to find gobos online and that kind of thing, we can show you where to find that. Lots of different stuff. Thanks for coming. Have a good night.